Apologies, we're starting slightly behind schedule. Thank you for those joining us in the room and those joining in online. My name is Yuambari Highway. I'm the Deputy Director for Partnerships and Policy with TIPNG. I'd like to welcome you to the day 2 of the TIPNG Elections Seminar for 2022. This is still in the morning, going towards the afternoon session, the second and final session of the day, where we will be having one panel and closing remarks as part of our program. Just in terms of housekeeping for those that might have joined in the break, so the facilities are just out the door and on your left. My colleagues with the cameras will be taking photos, so if you have any objection to your photo being taken or used by TIPNG for this event, if you could kindly let them know, and they can exclude you from the photos. In case of emergency, the emergency master point is just down the stairs and at the car park, where the fire marshal will be able to give us instructions. And if you are posting on social media about this event, we'd like you to use the hashtag TIPNG elections. This second panel session is on the objective of integrity to strengthen public confidence in elections. It's a important discussion, I think was mentioned and alluded to in a previous panel discussion when we had questions around security operations in the country. This is the second component of TIPNG's intervention into elections with the launch of our report yesterday. The report looked at recommendations around promotion of transparency, that is the dissemination of information in a timely, accessible, and accurate manner. And we also looked at integrity, that is the creation and agreement to a set of rules that are followed by the parties who agree to those set of rules. So these components of integrity and transparency are TIPNG's prime intervention on how to restore public confidence in elections, and speaks to the theme of the event for today, which is promoting elections integrity through transparency. So the argument that we are making is that if we have integrity and transparency in the process, there will be public confidence in the outcome of the elections. For those joining us for the second panel session of day 2, we've had extensive discussion on day 1, specifically from the Electoral Commissioner, as well as the Chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Elections, looking at what the issues were in 2022, but also more importantly, what could be done following the Parliamentary Committee's establishment. In day 2, we had a panel discussion in the morning, focusing on transparency. We had speakers from civil society, the media, the Electoral Commission, and the Department of ICT share insights on how information can be communicated to the public, particularly electoral information, so that citizens are engaged in the process of elections in Papua New Guinea. The second panel session that we're having today is on the integrity to strengthen public confidence in elections. It'll be looking at the learnings from past experiences, and this panel will discuss opportunities that promote integrity through the life cycle of the election process, so that public confidence can be restored. So I'd like to invite panelists each to come up on stage one by one, and as they come up, I'd like you to welcome them with a round of applause. Our first panelist for this afternoon is Dr. Silviu Jora. If you could make your way to the stage. Dr. Jora is the Deputy Head of Delegation to the EU. Our second speaker for this afternoon's panel session is Ms. Kathy Alex. Kathy is the Program Manager with Advancing PNG Women Leaders Network. And our third distinguished panelist for this event is Mr. Michael Mosiri. So if you could join us on stage. Mr. Mosiri is the Deputy Commissioner Corporate with the Correctional Service, PNG Correctional Service. Let's give a combined round of applause to our panelists. I think this is a panel that will be tackling the issue of integrity. As stated at the outset, integrity TIPNG views as a set of rules or processes. It can be the law, it can be a code of conduct or any other expectations. They have to be agreed to by the parties involved, and those processes have to be followed through. In the conduct of elections, integrity is a key component, sometimes technically, where we talk about integrity of the roll, for instance, or integrity of electoral data. But for this discussion, we'll be focusing on the security arrangements, the integrity of the electoral process, and how that process can be strengthened. I think in terms of setting the scene, it's important to have observations that have given some insight into the conduct of elections in PNG. We heard from election observers yesterday, particularly the ANU, NRI, and the IPPCC, in addition to TIPNG's own report. The EU also had a mission that conducted observation in PNG, and I'd like to come to you, Dr. Jora, as our first panelist. If you could share with us some of the objectives of that observation by the European Union and some of its key findings.
So, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. So I'm very glad to be here, and I attended also the part of the seminar yesterday, and I was delighted with the presentations made by Honorable Alan Bird and by the Electoral Commissioner. So I think all the preconditions for an electoral reform are currently present. I mean, there is a parliamentary commission being set up. The electoral commissioner recognized that there were problems and explained why there were problems, and he even has a plan for addressing them. The political establishment recognized that the things were not as should have been, so there is a need for a reform. So there is a debate, as we can see, throughout the electoral process. The media presented the things with freedom, and there was a large amount of criticism there comparing with other countries. So there is a certain level of transparency of what's happening and self-criticism. So I cannot see any obstacle why the electoral reform should not proceed. At least with my foreign eyes, I cannot understand. However, we have to look back a little bit also to the election in 2017, that right after, in 2018, there was a lot of enthusiasm for change. And a commission has been, a constitutional and law reform commission has been established, and a report has been delivered, and seminars have been held. But after 2019, when the report has been presented, by 2020, the reform trend ran out of steam, so to speak. Of course, we have the excuse of COVID. So that might provide, of course, an excuse, but we have to be careful that this time the enthusiasm doesn't run out of steam by, let's say, mid next year. So we have to keep the momentum present. Some other observation why I think that there is a fertile ground for reform and for trust and confidence in the electoral process here and in the democracy here, because the people here in Papua New Guinea are interested in politics. They are interested in democracy, and they are interested in electoral participation. I was stunned to see the level of participation and interest from the part of the public, comparing with other, let's say, more democratic countries, or more, let's say, more historical democratic tradition, with a past of democracy, where people, especially the younger people, are very apathic. They don't care anymore. They don't participate to the elections. They are, by definition, they lack trust in their political establishment. I don't want to give examples, but okay, if you look, ask somebody on the streets of Italy, do you go to vote? I don't go anymore because I don't trust. And it's, okay, maybe one of the countries where democracy has been born. Okay, look in my own country, Romania. Okay, yeah, we don't vote anymore because we don't trust the establishment, we don't trust the political, we cannot change anything, everybody's just the same. And probably the same, I mean, in France, probably exceptions are the Nordic countries or Switzerland, smaller countries, but the process is more rigorous, I say. But if I look also at Japan, the people don't vote anymore, they don't care about politics. They just accept as it is, and go forward. But not in PNG. From what I see in the election, people standing in queue for hours, and the amount of patience they had, and they have expressed. It was amazing. So this, and also whenever, so if you want an porte-parole or a speaker for the level of democracy in PNG, I'm the one to say. And I was saying also to our electoral observers who first want to say, PNG failed on this technical standard and that technical standard. I say, okay, who cares? Ultimately, this country has been a democracy ever since its independence. Maybe it's one of the only democracy in the Pacific, if not in the whole Asia Pacific, which since independence, since the establishment of this state, remained a democracy without any gap. So this is to be commended, this is to be encouraged, and with a little support and work from outside and from inside, it can certainly be improved and can be a model for the whole Pacific region and beyond. So despite of poverty, despite of level of illiteracy, despite 1,000 different tribes and so on, still the people are interested in democracy, in participation to the elections, in what's happening, and so on. And you can also follow and through the debates on social media, especially the younger people, they are interested. So there is hope, there is big hope, I would say. So on this optimistic mood, I would like to maybe to provide an outline of the recommendations made by the EU election observation mission. Actually, it was an election experts mission. So we have a report. We have already forwarded the report to Commissioner Alan Bird, to the Prime Minister, and so on. And I hope together with Transparent International TPNG report and other reports, it will create the necessary support to guide the Electoral Commission towards a comprehensive reform. So the EU has made 15 recommendations, out of which 5 are priority recommendations. We said there's no point. In 2017, we made like 22 recommendations. Okay, I asked the experts to make it fewer that can be followed and eventually implemented. So I will not pass through all of them. I will just select something. First and foremost, obviously, something has to be done with the electoral roll in order to restore the public confidence. Okay, so if electoral roll is not reformed, is not improved, is not renewed, nothing will be done, right? And no public confidence will be done. Do something for the electoral roll, and the people will see immediately that there are changes. And first and foremost, it is the national census, which should be done anyway, not only for the future elections, but for the progress of this country. You have to know how many people are there. Are they 8 million? Are they? There are even a calculation that the population may be close to 20 million. I heard some calculation, mathematical simulations and so on. People don't know. This is simply not acceptable. So census and something to be an update of the electoral roll. And the people will see immediately that the next general election can only be better if you have an updated and correct electoral roll with a voter identification. So first it's a proper identification for everyone, and then possibly identification by simple biometric data. This is a technical debate, but if it works in India, why shouldn't it work in PNG? Then, of course, there are a bunch of recommendations on how to improve the election administration. And here, a lot of things are falling on the shoulders of the PNG Electoral Commission. They know it, And I understood from the yesterday discourse that they are aware of the issues and they will try to address them, providing that they will be given financial resources. Because only with goodwill you cannot move. Especially here in PNG, where things are, and the Pacific in general, where things are, all services and trainings and so on are expensive. So amongst the recommendation is to increase the number of electoral commissioners to ease the border of the central electoral commission. For example, to have up to 5 commissioners also in the regions to correspond to the main regions of PNG. Also, the electoral commission has to strengthen its communication with external stakeholders. For example, by a liaison committee as a useful tool of communication with key election stakeholders such as representatives of political parties, civil society, and the candidates. Better training for the elections officials. And now I'm not talking about sophisticated training, just those men, women, boys and girls should know that they should be on time. I've been around Port Moresby and a few other locations, and by 9 o'clock there was nobody. The voters were there, but the officers, I don't know, were having coffee. Some were standing at 11, some at 12, some were there at 8 o'clock as they should have been. That's not acceptable. If you are entrusted with a public function, you should be there on time. It's not rocket science. Everybody has a phone with, it's not the, you don't know what's the time and so on. So that's, some basic elements should be taught to these election officials, especially to those that are temporary recruited for the elections. As a matter of, by definition, okay, in order to improve the trust of the people, the voters should see that first the officials are on time. And all the polling stations are being open at the same time, like say 6 o'clock in the morning. Not somewhere 6, somewhere 12, somewhere 11 o'clock. And that's from what I saw in Port Moresby. A more remote location might have been even worse. Then the overall transparency of the announcement of the election results, of course, is to be improved. So PNG Electoral Commission should publish the official data and on voter turnout per district, including a gender breakdown, number of invalid votes per district, and the number of ballot boxes excluded from the count by returning officers, and so on. So this should be online. I understood that what the PNG Electoral Commission did during this election was much better online presentation of results than in 2017, but still there was a lot of lag and a lot of delays in presenting the data. And the data was not complete, of course. Then something very important was, which was also emphasized by the Electoral Commission yesterday, is that financial independence of the PNG Electoral Commission should be guaranteed by law and should be implemented, not only stipulated in the law, but also in reality. And also the regional offices of the Electoral Commission should be benefit from more human resources and financial support, because the things were pretty smooth in Port Moresby, but PNG is not only Port Moresby. Then, of course, the campaign environment should be improved so people will see that the next elections are better. As long as there will be violence, there will be no confidence. The people will not trust the process. And addressing the violence, I know it's not easy, particularly in the highlands, where it's a way of life, it's a way of dealing. Well, in the highlands, it's a way of a societal feature, but we are in the 21st century, so something can be done, it should be done based on the experience of the last 2 elections. I mean, everybody anticipated that there would be violence and inter-tribal clashes in the highlands, and still there were not enough forces being deployed. Honorable Peter Ipatas even suggested to have foreign support from Australia and New Zealand, as has been done from time to time. So there are solutions, I think, especially when you know what to expect, in order to have at least less violence. Because I don't think that for the foreseeable future you can have no violence at all. It happens, okay, look into the United States, it happens in Greece or whatever, so we cannot expect zero violence and tension. But less, it's a feasible objective. And no casualties again. That would be I would say, a benchmark for improvements. From the moment you have zero casualties, no victims, no deaths, they will say, yes, we did it. Yes, we can. And I'm sure you can. Then campaign finance, of course. Campaign expenditure ceilings for political parties and candidates should be fixed and more transparent. That's a matter of integrity. Then equal access to public media, again, to improve the level of confidence of the people. Not only the big figures should have access to the main media channels, free access, I mean, because many candidates, especially the independent ones, they could not afford to have to pay private channels or to pay for airtime. So as it's the case in other countries, each and every candidate should have, let's say, like 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes of free airtime. Now I understand that with the level of enthusiasm in PNG, with thousands of candidates, I know 3,000 candidates, you cannot have each and every one having a show on TV. So maybe in parallel you should address, okay, the way people are registering. But this is, I think, so typical PNG that, okay, you cannot tell people, okay, you should not, if you are interested to participate in a candidate, I mean, say, why not? Why not? So maybe the main newspapers can allocate, or maybe this is a thing that can be addressed in the future. In the future, but a technical solution to assure that every candidate has equal access to public media, free airtime, or at least at a reasonable cost. Then participation of women. I'm sure it has been discussed at length. When you have like 50% of the population women and there are no women in parliament, only 2 women in parliament, we have a problem, of course. And if 50% of your population do not trust that they can make it into the parliament, again, there is a problem. So of course, we made a clear recommendation established through the organic law that several reserve seats for women should be assured. So I think the idea of having 5, at least 5, corresponding to the 5 main regions in PNG, it's feasible and it can be done, at least on a temporary basis, until you, for the next 5 to 10 years, so you see an improvement in the number of women in the parliament and a momentum that will allow the women to get enough confidence to participate on an equal footing with men. Then civil society and international observation. So apart from Transparency International, there were not many domestic observers due to the lack of financing. And also observation should not be only during the polling process. It should be also done during the counting and also during the campaign as such. But very few could do it. So the international donors, including us and the government, should provide more support to the organizations that can fulfill the role of domestic observers. And last but not least, the electoral disputes. So now the process is complex, it's lengthy, and usually, okay, it it ends with a dismissal of the case. But the most critical aspect is that it's lengthy. It takes 2 years or more to have a solution. So we propose to establish a time frame of no more than 2 months for the disputed return cases. Maybe you should filter them. Not all of them are worth treatment, but the serious ones. So you allocate more resources in the justice system in order to speed up this procedure, to establish clear steps. And the first exams for this electoral reform we envisage will be the 2 by-elections, which we'll see probably next year in Bougainville and in East Sepik, I think. If there are some lessons to be learned, we will see if they are applied in the by-elections. So these were my, okay, not so quick comments, but or short comments, but from my heart, some of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jura, for that extensive update in terms of the EU observer mission. And I think it's important that we also started on that democratic interest that's here in PNG. I'd like to bring in the other voices on the panel as well. And we have Deputy Commissioner. We heard reflections at the end towards Dr. Jura's presentation about the role that the courts play in the contributing to the integrity of the elections. That if we do not have a speedy response to some of the electoral disputes, then justice delayed is justice denied. And the law and justice sector and the security personnel during the elections were key to the integrity of the elections. We had a number of questions also in the morning looking at the issues that Dr. Jura highlighted in his remarks in setting the scene in terms of the conduct of elections, the violence, the deaths. We heard from ANU yesterday that there have been 50 reported deaths, but could be as many as more than 200. So this is the kind of environment in which observer missions like the EU have come in and have given some of the detailed recommendations to state partners. But as the one of the representatives from the security personnel and the forces that were deployed to assist with the security of the elections, I'd like to come to you, Deputy Commissioner, and ask, what does it mean in terms of your office? What does integrity mean to your office? And what were your experiences as you went about trying to defend the integrity during the elections? What were those experiences like?
Thank you for this opportunity. I commend TIPNG for, putting up a report to spell out, the activities and the deficiencies and the shortfalls that we encounter in the past elections, and in particular the 2022 election. And security forces, play a vital role in the entire process, working with the Electoral Commission and other partners to deliver safe and secure elections for all. Every country wants a legitimate government, and every 5 years we select leaders to form the government of the day. And these comments that were made yesterday and possibly this morning about, if we have to want a legitimate government, and we need to start planning now. And in the past experiences, we as the security forces, Joint Security Task Force, we see that, we need to start planning earlier. And if we are looking at 2027, we have to start now, as being alluded by a lot of presenters during this seminar. As far as Joint Security Task Force is concerned, we in particular CS and the defense, we operate on a call-out orders by the Commissioner of Police. And that call-out orders needs to come out earlier. So it gives our sister agencies the time to plan our parts in the delivering of the safe election. And in the past, it's like these orders not coming in good time, basically because we want directions from the Electoral Commission. And so this communication network needs to be established and strengthened early, and so we can communicate our roles and our participations in the delivering of good election outcomes. Secondly, we have commissioner's orders from the Commissioner of Police, and internally our Commissioner with Correctional Service also issue internal orders for our officers to get involved in the election and also participate in the provinces. And we select officers based on a very tight scrutiny. And officers who have, past bad, record and reputation are not engaged and involved in the elections. We have standard operating procedures that are put in place to guide the officers, men and women who are involved in the elections. And so they operate under those operating procedures. And yesterday there was a mention about, code of ethics. Code of ethics is something that we need to develop for all participants of the national elections. That's starting from political parties right down to the officers who are actually going to be involved, both the Electoral Commissioner officers, the provinces, and the members of the security forces. So they are abide by this code. And any officer, anyone that's not involved, not complying with the code of ethics has to be removed from participation. And we did that by exercising those in our own standard operating procedures to remove those officers who cannot comply and who are not behaving the way the public and everyone else expects. The other aspect of it is the resourcing of the security forces. It was almost like the 11th hour when we got our resources. How would we expect our officers to go out, like shooting ducks, out in the middle of nowhere and cannot actively participate because they're helpless and armless and whatever. So in that scenario, we have to go our own way to use our recurrent expenditure to support her. We also thank the government for putting up this body, the IDC, which, coordinates these activities, and we channel our concerns through that body up to Electoral Commission. With the professionalism and activities of the officers on the ground, each situation has its own merits and will dictate whether the officer respond positively or negatively. We cannot unless there's guarantee of their safety. In some circumstances, the security force is left to a situation where sometimes compromise can play a part. In terms of the planning, I'm suggesting here that the forum, through the forum, that the budget preparations, as was alluded to by my other colleague, it's got to be a budget that's approved by the Parliament, so it serves as a guide for each partner. It's a so it serves as a partner and gives us a guide. The commissioner's table is, so somewhere along the line, we need to have a more verified reporting by various sources to help us improve for better. As far as the judiciary is concerned, this is really beyond and above our security forces' control, as NJSS is a constitutional office, and they operate according to their timings and by law. And so, election petitions and everything else will be followed by their own process and practices. But we hope that, justice must be seen to be done, and there's a win-win for all parties concerned. In terms of getting instructions, as Commissioner of Police has all the overriding powers, and our specific role in correctional service was to protect the assets, government assets and facilities. But we went beyond that instructions to help, supervise in the pollings and escorts and other stuff. And our instructions were clear, but if they were engaged in other activities that have exceeded the boundaries of the correctional service, we appreciate, the comments, so corrective measures can be taken. With the issue of reporting, we have set up teams in the provinces of elections taking place and at our head office, in which seat reps are constantly coming to the commissioner from the start until the end, so he keeps track of everything that's going on, and vice versa, we report back to the Commissioner, Police and Electoral Commission as to what is happening and what's our involvement is in the field. But that needs to be improved, and with the presentation of the ICT, we hope those reportings will be improved and we get more accurate information and data passed on from the provinces to our commissioner. There are many challenges, and we cannot deny that there is a lot of room for improvement, and we look forward that whatever recommendations that comes out from here and from other observer groups will help us to improve more and more. I think one of the recommendations that we can make also is to set up another body below the IDEC so that it keeps coordination between all the other partners in the exercise, so that whatever decisions that are made by the IDEC will pass on down to this other body before it filters down to the agencies involved. Other than that, I'll stop here and whatever questions we can answer.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner, Corporate Services, Mr. Masiri, for that exhaustive description of the challenges as well as the actions and the opportunities faced by security personnel. I take your point also on the judiciary as being an independent arm of government, and it has its own functions to also pursue. I would like to also remind those in the room that we will be opening the floor for questions. So if you do have a question, to note it down. And that also goes for those watching online. Please, if you want to ask a question, just type it into the chat box and we can guide the questions to our panelists. Again, for those watching online and in the room, this is a panel discussion on the promotion of integrity in our elections. And we've heard from our speakers about some of the integrity challenges as well as the opportunities that face the country. I'd like to, on the point that Dr. Jara made, Papua New Guinea is not only Port Moresby. We have with us Ms. Kathy Alex from Advancing PNG Women Leaders Network, and I'd like to come to you next, Kathy. In terms of your organization, if you could tell us a bit about your organization and how you engaged in the elections process, and what were some of the perceptions that you encountered around integrity of the elections and public trust in the elections?
The Advancing PNG Women Leaders Network is a network of women leaders with the purpose of providing access to resources and connections that build women leaders and their organizations to progressively influence positive change in their communities. With these elections, we were accredited also by PNGEC to be a domestic observer. Our specific area of interest was women's participation in the 2022 elections, but with a bigger goal of how we could normalize women's leadership in this country with a deeply patriarchal rooted society we come from, and knowing from other global and from the world and other countries the influence and the leadership that women in particular bring into change of economies and the betterment of every country. So for us, we're able to also give volunteers to TIPNG from Helen Southern Islands. We observed elections in NCDC Central and Southern Islands. While we're talking on these different topics and all of us sitting here in this room, I also want us to bring us back to who we are as a citizen in this country. And also, one clear indicator if there was integrity in these elections, it would be citizens, every citizen accessing their right to vote, despite who you are, where you are, and where you come from, and if there was fair, free, and safe elections for everyone. That would be the first indicator that there was integrity in these elections. We will all have our own answer to that. Generally, from the we saw it for women, really, women did not have the fair chance. It wasn't free and fair for them to elect, or even to stand as a candidate for in these elections. but also saying that after attending yesterday's session and hearing all the recommendations, more policy level, more departmental, more high kind of setback to see how do we come up with solutions that are grassroots oriented. Because we can talk about everything and anything, but Papua New Guinea, we must know that 85% of the people are rural-based. It's only 15% in the urban areas. If you talk about technology, only 10% have access to digital platforms. Not everyone. That we must not forget in any of our recommendations in ensuring we have an election that's free, fair, and safe for everyone going forward. Also, I was grateful to hear the rep from HEU mentioning that there was momentum in the past election, but then it faded off from forums like this and so many other recommendations that good organizations like TIPNG and everyone that has put a lot of effort to ensuring the recommendations are implemented, and they are not. If you go back to all the reports and you see, I think one particular thing that the government of the day did was the separation of the electorates. Every other recommendation tends to be the same. And they still stand, and that's a reality. And we will have to go back to the citizens. If we will have to make this country free, fair, and safe, despite the rules and regulations, despite each of the departments having their own roles to play, we have to see this country as one and see that every single person has a role to play. And it's not because someone will make money, it's because of our future. And especially the young people sitting here. You have a future you will inherit from everything that's happening. And the hope seems to lie in the government of the day. We see that Papua New Guinea is interested in elections and is alluded here, that every other democratic countries do have their elections and only few. The young people don't want to go for election. They don't want to vote. We will come to the stage in this country one time, and slowly it is. The rural folk are starting it. You know, the hope lies that the government will provide the service. People in the rural area, one single question you ask them, why do you want to vote? I want service. I want accessibility to health education. I want money to pay for my school fees. I'm just saying these things to ground us. We can talk about policy change, but simple policies that stood in the Constitution, like the ward recorder. We talk about the national census at the national level. We talk about the e-voting thing, but it all comes back to the integrity of the record that you get from the ward. And that system is already there. The ward record is supposed to be updating it. How do we make that work? Forget about all these so-called reforms. What do we do with what we already have? It was good. The 1975 election was good. Everyone came out, they had pride in voting for the government of the day. It's about going back to ensuring that people do what they're supposed to do. I was surprised, like, part of the questions we had, we were interested in women's participation, but we did not have a tool that was a credible tool to use. We had to be trained by ANU to use their tools that they have, observation tools. And one question was asking people about DSIP. Who knows what DSIP is? And for a young person to tell them that, do you know that every year 10 million is given to your district for your MP to bring service to your district? Do you know that, like, they were like, oh my God, you kidding me, 10 million. 5 years is 50 million. You know the reaction that person gets? My future. If every young people, and I completely agree to say that the hope is in the young people. The young people of this day who you are sitting here, especially those who are working, you have a lot to give back to your community. And we've seen through the elections that the block voting in the Highlands, it's the business people who who have the kind of the upper hand to tell the tribal people to vote who they support. And you know why it's influential? Because when people are in need, when they need school fees, when there's someone is sick, it's the business people of that community that go back to help the people in need. We can talk policies, but we're talking about people's survival every day. And relationships matter no matter what. This is a country that relies on relationships. Even though I know this is wrong, you're doing right. I know you're not a good leader. If you are there when I am in need, I will support you. This is PNG. And I also want to let every stakeholders know, let's not forget the context of this country, the reality of what it is when we make our recommendations and action plans and all that. It's the end of the day, it's the people that their lives will be affected, and they make the decision. I've also heard about yesterday when the recommendation on tightening up polling stations, bringing it to the LLG. This is impossible. You're making it completely unsafe for anyone to come to a LLG. I'll give you an example, Kutubu LLG. You've got villages that are out in nowhere. How would the Bosavi people come to Kutubu? How will they come to vote? Along the way, there'd be security, another roadblock there. There's a lot of things. So recommendation, we can say we can tighten this and that, but always remember the underlying. It has to be free, fair, and safe for everyone. Everyone, despite who they are. I think I can't go more. Just grounding things only.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I think it's a really important intervention, and let's give you a round of applause. This is the reality of the context in which we work, and this discussion on integrity has to be multi-layered. I think in the TIPNG data, we also show that these issues are very much driven by the context. Before I open the floor for questions, and I note the discussions that we've had from our panelists are very precise. I wanted it would be remiss of me not to also come back to Dr. Jora and just to one of the points that Kathy mentioned about working with what we have. Often when we have the discussions, often the recommendations have price tags attached to them, and there's expectation that it requires funding to deliver these activities. And we're mindful also we have in the room, for instance, and I commend the EU that this is an activity that was funded by the Australian government. The EU is here to speak. We've had the American delegations, New Zealand delegations in the room, and international support to elections has been consistent. But in terms of the coordination of that support to the electoral efforts in PNG, how do the major donors and supporters align their activities on elections? Are there particular recommendations that you have on donor coordination to the points that have been made by those that are seeking resourcing for activities? Is there a unified approach to this from the international community?
Thank you for this question. It should be like this, but it's in practice there is not, at least for the time being. So this is the situation. Before the election, we had the donors coordination meeting, checking where we are. The people were horrified with the delays, what can be done. This coordination has been chaired by the Australian Electoral Commission, has been the most involved and the most interested in having free and fair elections here and having stability in Papua New Guinea. Now you have touched a very important aspect, these aspects of donor coordination, synergies, and avoiding duplications. So this is something we'll certainly have in mind, at least those like-minded partners that regularly meet. I mean, Australia, New Zealand, EU, UK, France, maybe also Japan, so see where we can complement each other and avoid duplications. From a point of view of big infrastructure expenses and so on, clearly probably it's in the hands of Australians, probably New Zealanders too. We can get involved with bits and pieces, with training. Maybe we can support the census, maybe the biometric registration with something. We will have to see. Maybe we support the work of Transparency International, PNG. As you know, we already support your work on anti-corruption. So when it comes to anti-corruption, also we can have a link to the integrity of the electoral process. So we will have to see. From the part of the European Union, we have about 30% of our activities are on good governance, including anti-corruption. So from here we can derivate some activities or projects dedicated to also to the electoral process. And when it comes to good governance, of course, reforming the Electoral Commission as a governmental body can be covered under this umbrella. But it is certainly a point well taken that we'll have to get together and see who's doing what and who's planning what, and then be as a team more efficient on this. Thank you.
Thank you for that commitment, Dr. Jura. I think it's apt time to now go to those in the room, and those online, feel free to type in your questions as well. Do we have any questions from the room? I see one at the back. If you could state your name and your organization and direct your question. And I think I'll take two questions just so that they can go to the panelists. So first question.
Thank you, and thank you, TIPNG, for organizing this conference. My name is Ekili Jim. I work with Consultative Implementation Monitoring Council. It's a multilateral organization in the country that works with government and CSO. But I'll be speaking not on behalf of my organization, but as a individuals and based on my experience in this election. I told myself I'm not going to say anything in this election, but my sister from PNG Advanced Women Network has stirred something in me that I think I wanted to contribute something to the discussion. All right. Bit of context on 2 points that I want to share. I was one of the youngest candidates in maybe the Islands region who contested this election, and I came a single number out of 28 candidates. There are a lot of assumptions. There were a lot of presentations yesterday on Islands politics, which I totally agree. But there are a few that I kind of disagree. One of them is to assume that everybody is contesting because they want to enjoy the perks and privileges, which is completely not true. In the islands, we contest election mainly because of pride, and secondly is because of competition between tribes. There are a lot of rich people who in the islands who contest election not to go in there and gain power. But they say power excites people, so there are a lot of people with money going there just to enjoy that power and get attention from the people in the village. So, and there are some people like me who believe in change and who want to really make things happen for the country. That's why we contest. So to assume that everybody is contesting because of the perks and privileges is something I will disagree. My grandfather used to tell me that the word corruption is a foreign language that he has came to understand in the recent years, because previously there was no corruption in this country, and now I agree that we should go back and see what has happened and how we have come as a country, and we need to redefine democracy for us. In the islands, there's block votes, and I also...
Sorry, Hekeli, someone just asked if you can get to a question, so
yes.
In the interest of time.
So I think, Ivo, what has happened over the last 40, 50 years of this country and democracy and where we are, I think the point that I'm trying to make is that we have come a long way, but we need to go back and see what has happened and really focusing. And one of the things that I want to stress on before I think sit down is on biometric. There are some things that we want to bring into the country, but for me it's not going to work out for this country in the context of our politics and our democracy. What works in India will not work in PNG because people are indoctrinated to believe that when you register your NID, 66 and all these doctrines are in the process. So my point is just to go back and see what has happened, how we have evolved, to see where we are now and how do we fix that process. And that is going back to the community and get their views and ideas. Reforms are good, but reforms also create more problems than solutions. So that is just my comments on the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Hercules. Again, I would ask if you can ask a question, and please, if you could state your name and the organization before asking your question.
Thank you, colleagues. My name is Olugbenga Ige from the PNG National Research Institute. Let me extend my appreciation to, all the panelists. I'm really delighted, at your submissions, especially, the woman among them. She seems to believe that the problem we are experiencing in PNG can best be solved, by solutions that are available within. And the same goes for the last speaker. I have some questions, and
I'm going to ask you to keep it to at least one question, and if you could direct it to the speakers. We only have about 10 more minutes remaining for the session. Thank you.
Okay. Of course, there are 4, but perhaps I will just have to take the most important one, and that goes to Dr. Jura. You've mentioned so many things, but I will not be able to ask specific questions because our time is limited. But I just want to bring your attention to this fact. Now, in PNG or in other nations having similar demographics, it is grossly impossible to determine, election petitions in 2 months that you have mentioned in your recommendation. The minimum I've seen, is actually 2 years. And if that is done within 2 years, it's fine. But do you see election tribunals, the chief judge constituting body of benchers or experienced legal luminaries, to take the first stage of petitions from politicians who have one complaint or the other regarding the process, and is when they can't resolve such issues at that level that they now move to the courts proper. That's one. And second, in the European Union, you people have the capacity for certain machines that can register voters. That's voters' registration devices. I'm aware that is available in countries in the European Union, or they supply it to the developing nations. How far can the EU, assist PNG with the provision of these voter registration devices to enable them create another common role, for voters? And lastly, the third one that I'm going to crown it with is, now we mentioned block voting. In the European Union also, there was this man later, Adrian Forty in the UK. There are machines, you've evolved that can actually enable us to separate votes that have been, voted en masse and those ones that are actually voted by individuals. So how far can the EU go, to support PNG in the provision of these machines in 2027 elections? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for limiting your 4 questions to only 3 questions. I appreciate it. I think I will just take one more from Henry in front. I saw his hand go up. So you had a question, Henry. If you could, again, state your name just for those that have joined us.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. My name is Henry. I work with CIMC, but my question will be asked as a citizen of PNG. This one is directed to our good doctor that did a presentation on, the requirements, those basic elements of an election. I'm looking at, development partners contributing to assisting the government's development aspirations through either budget support or technical or funding mechanisms. So, when development partners come in to support the government, they look at how they can support the government to deliver on its aspirations. And I believe delivering a successful election is one of those aspirations of the government in PNG. So considering that you development partners want to support PNG for its development process and cost, my question is, would it be possible for development partners to actually when providing financial support to the government of PNG, is it possible that you can actually direct the government that the funding that you are giving is for a specific requirement? As example, maybe during elections, you want to see that that funding is used for elections, but then you also, is it possible to put in mechanisms that can assist the government to use that money appropriately and put in your own requirements for what the government should do to make sure that the outcomes of the elections are successful, so that way you are supporting the outcome of the outcome of a successful election. Thank you.
Okay. I think most of the questions have been directed towards Dr. Jora. I'll just summarize again for the questions, Dr. Jora. So firstly...
I remember them. I will start
okay.
with
Okay.
Okay, so regarding the assistance to the government, we usually do not provide direct assistance to the government, but we work with other implementing organizations. So most fundings and projects are on a competitive basis. So the civil society or other implementers, probably in partnership with the UN or with other different UN organizations, are bidding for this, and the best and the most cost-effective usually wins. There is also a modality to provide direct budget support, like we are first experimenting now in PNG for good governance. So we provide direct financial support to the government in the amount of like 30 million to improve the police training and various other activities, but we haven't thought yet about this direct budget support for strengthening the electoral process. But it is a modality, but usually our usual modality is to provide funding on a competitive basis to the civil society and other implementers. So we'll have to see now. Usually, of course, the fact that for the first time last year we started a program by budget support, direct implementing modality, means that the PNG government has matured enough to handle, to be trusted to handle this amount of money. But still there are a lot of issues with people understanding the procedure, how it works, and so on. So it's not so easy. But to repeat my answer, usually we do not provide the money directly to the government. We provide to different implementers, usually civil society, especially the amounts are smaller. These your three questions. So 2 months might be short, and of course it may be short, but this is the only way to be effective. If you wait for 2 years, what are you going to do after 2 years? You wait for 2 years, you throw out the fraudulent MP, and 2 years is simply too long to wait for a resolution to correct a mistake or a fraud that has been done during an election. Whether this can be done by creating a separate or specialized judicial body, I think this will be a good idea, and we have to look into different models where it exists. So this could be a good topic for your institute to research. And come with a solution. Look into other countries, how they solved. I'm sure maybe, but even Googling it, some ideas can pop out. Then regarding these machines for registering the voters, a machine will not work unless somebody has an ID, a proper ID. So now we go back to an efficient and proper ID system, which is an electronic one, which is to be trusted. It should be with biometric features. Or at least to be an electronic one, to be more effective. Okay, but now, currently in PNG, there is not a unified ID system. So no machine will work unless you can show you an ID. And a machine usually, okay, when you put it, okay, it should have an electronic chip. Otherwise, okay, what kind of machine it is? Yeah, as for other devices to identify ballot voting, I'm not aware of this. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it will be difficult, not ballot vote, yeah, block voting. And I'm not aware that in Europe blood voting can be possible. Really, it will be immediately a super scandal, and yeah, even here in PNG, I think it has been occurred only in the remote areas of the highlands. And the problem is that people are aware where picture has been taken, so now the police has to take some measures. If there is evidence, there is. If it's done without consequences, in full broad light and with brazeness, okay, then we have a problem, indeed, with the confidence of people. So I hope that following the petition, this 107 petitions, at least some of them, let's say at least 10 of them will be actually followed by actual prosecution, and people will have some trust in the judicial system, in the corrective capacity of the judicial system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jura. I think we still have time for questions from the floor. So do I see a question in front? Could I have a mic? Again, if you could state your name and organization and direct your question.
Thank you. My name is Velosa Hahemben. I'm with the Voice Incorporation, but I want to ask this question as a concerned citizen. My question will be directed to the Deputy Commissioner. One of the key issues that we've all observed during the national general elections was the violence, and one of it was concerning the police as well. So my question is, do you think one of the additional contributing factors to the the transparency within the police, is there a lack of in-depth training that these policemen and women have before the national general elections? And if so, are there any plans in place to extend the training period of these police officers so that they can understand the basic rights of the civilians and how to go about being ethical in their everyday exercises? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good question. I cannot speak for police because they are the ones who actually take lead in this thing, and they call us to assist. But in terms of training, I think that's something the police commissioner and the team can look at. As far as correctional service is concerned, we have established our curriculum to include, human rights and other programs that, promote professionalism and that whenever our officers are engaged in either public or internal activities, professionalism must be promoted at all times. But I think that's something us as a security force in our, team meetings, we can talk about to, see a way forward in how we can address our officers to work together to deliver whatever the service the public expects from us. Thank you.
I think to Velosa, your question, TIPNG has also tried to work with the PNGCS, and we ran a session with the CS and the RPNGC, the Royal Papua New Guinea Constabulary as well, an ethics session prior to deployment with about 140 and 160 personnel, just going through ethics situations and getting them prepared about the kind of conflicts of interest that they might encounter while on deployment. So this is definitely a space that we at TIPNG have been interested in, and we've developed some materials in partnership with the police and with the correctional service. And this was through funding support from the Australian government as well. So it's a space where more information and more assistance is needed. I also want to adapt your question slightly and give it to our colleague Kathy, because I think it's an important point of discussion that we haven't talked about, what the community perception of security personnel and violence in the community was during the election. I understand that you were observing in Hela and Southern Highlands, and there were security issues there. What did that look like, and how were citizens reacting to the presence of security personnel? Were they helping the processes, or were they hindering the processes, as you mentioned, for a free, fair, and safe election? What was your view on the ground? Sorry, if we can give it to Kathy. Yep.
was both. Presence of security in a sense where they could exercise what they're supposed to do, they could. But when they were outnumbered, they just stood and watched right in the polling booths. Came to places, instances where our observers couldn't get inside the polling booths. Because it is required that observers has to be part of the polling officials, just standing and observing what's happening. And in this particular place I was there, there were 3 council wards that were voting, 3 polling booths. We could see separate lines for women, but to one polling booth. There were no separate ballot boxes for women, and that was one of the things that the women highlighted. We can have separate lines, but we should have our own ballot boxes to put in our votes. In those places, I've also noticed that 2 other polling booths, we had our observers there inside the polling booths. The other polling booths, there were police and other security personnel there, as well as the polling officials, but our observers not allowed inside. I actually had to ask the polling official why she wasn't allowed into the polling booth. They mentioned that her name is not on the list of people who are supposed to be in the polling booths. So that's why I kind of say 2 instances. When they are overpowered, they can't do anything but just be there. But when their presence makes a lot of difference, the police personnel. But we know our police personnel are outnumbered by the citizens. That we know very well. In terms of security, it has to come back to the citizens of this country. I keep saying citizens because we have to own this process. And every policy and everything needs to come back in a way that empowers the people to own it. And the young people have a lot of influence. That's why I keep saying the hope is in the young people. There can be policemen and defense there, but when the young people come out there and they could be paid by a leader saying that, I want you to support this party, policemen will literally do nothing. Even the people will do nothing, even though they know it's wrong. It's the people who are influential, who are the strong ones in the community, and it's the young people. Any interventions, if we want to see country prosper, not very reactive kind of solutions or interventions that we keep doing, Band-Aid, we have to look at very preventive, proactive, that's community-based, very grassroots community-based. And it's so simple. I give an example. I keep saying the ward recorder. If we have a system that enforces that in the council ward, the ward recorder can be influenced also. But if we have where stakeholders are part of it, not just the council ward stakeholders, but stakeholders, if there's companies there, those others to be part of the committee that also ensures the ward recording is as people who live in that council ward, but not just ghost names. That would be the first step. And it's simple. You don't need money to do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy, for that eloquent reminder of how we can work within what we have and the importance of the work that we do. I'm mindful of time, and on our program we've reached the end of this particular session. It's now 1:30 in the afternoon. In the discussion we heard from Dr. Jura, who went through really the observer mission and the 15 overall recommendations, but 5 specific recommendations. I think he emphasized something that was shared by the other speakers as well, that elections is of importance to Papua New Guineans, and they're willing to commit the time and the energy to it. And the integrity of the elections is something that all Papua New Guineans have a stake and an interest in. We heard from the Deputy Commissioner of CS, Corporate Services, about the challenges, but also the coordination mechanisms and the utility of a Joint Security Task Force working in collaboration with the IDEC. There were recommendations, for instance, specific to IDEC coordination and having more support to the security personnel earlier on, and those were noted in the discussion. But then we had intervention from Kathy speaking to the importance of being grounded in our approaches, that often we look at big ticket items that might require bilateral support or donor support, when we already have mechanisms that are in place in Papua New Guinea. So I think the panel is for a wide-ranging discussion, but it was also very specific and contextual. And I think they informed us as the second and final panel of day 2. So I'd like you to join me in thanking them for speaking this afternoon. As I hand over to Aryan, our CEO, to MC the next part of our program, I just ask our speakers to remain on stage. There'll be an official photo of the panel before you can leave the stage. So I'll hand over to Aryan.
Thank you to our distinguished panelists. Let's also give a round of applause for our moderator for today's panels, Yuan Bari.